My name is Troy Parfit. I'm the author of The Devil and His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler, and I'd like to welcome you to Beyond Order, Jordan Peterson, Crypto-fascism, and the Occult, part 3 of a series in which I will explain, mostly through an analysis of Jordan Peterson's newest book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, how the world's most recognized clinical psychologist is a crypto-fascist and an occultist. In Beyond Order, this is the image for Rule 2, and it's entitled Materia Prima. In this video, I'm going to begin to explain why Peterson chose this image and what he's trying to convey by using it. Also, you should gain a better understanding of how Peterson fuses crypto-fascism with the occult. As Peterson says, materia prima is an alchemical term meaning primal material or raw matter. In Aleister Crowley's Confessions, the autobiography that one of his German disciples sent to the Gestapo in the hopes they would realize the German High Command needed sorcery lessons from a British occultist, he says, "This prima materia of the work need not be the pure gold of confidence." So here we see Crowley talking about prima materia and pure gold in a way that indicates that he was referring to alchemy. However, the sentence's ending, of confidence, tells us that he was using alchemy to create a metaphor. When people write about alchemy, they are generally speaking in metaphor, unless they are penning a manual, although you don't see many of those these days. I mean, it's unlikely you'll be in the airport bookstore and spot a copy of, say, Alchemy for Dummies. Carl Jung wrote about alchemy quite a lot, for example in Psychology and Alchemy, which Peterson cites in Beyond Order. Remember, Peterson has said that Beyond Order is mostly about understanding the motivation, singular, behind the Holocaust. What does alchemy have to do with the Holocaust? In any event, Jung used alchemy as a metaphor while discussing the psyche, dream symbolism, Christianity, and so on. Peterson tends to use alchemy to imitate text from Aleister Crowley, as a tribute to Crowley and the occult, and as a vehicle to further his crypto-fascism, claims I will support in due time. Incidentally, one of Jordan Peterson's cult followers has asked me, how do you know he's plagiarizing Crowley? Maybe he's just plagiarizing Jung. That's a little like a defense attorney saying, before we see evidence from the prosecutor in support of the claim that my client struck the victim with a golf club, how do we know he didn't do it with this baseball bat? All kidding aside, Peterson is actually plagiarizing Jung and Crowley. In other words, he talks about Jung, cites Jung, and plagiarizes Jung, especially his occultic Red Book. Why would he cite someone and plagiarize them? The short answer is, he's mad, I tell you, mad. Among the other writers Peterson cites, discusses, and plagiarizes are Friedrich Nietzsche, John Milton, Joseph Campbell, and Hannah Arendt. Peterson uses Jung as camouflage for his Crowley piracy, just as he uses Nietzsche to help conceal his lifting from Hitler. However, his subterfuge is useless because figuring out exactly who his plagiarism comes from is quite easy. Moreover, he undermines his attempt to camouflage by plagiarizing the very people who are meant to act as camouflage. Once more, the lights are on, but nobody's home. Again, here's Peterson's version of Materia Prima, which he says was inspired by Hermes Trismegistus, Occulta Philosophia. That's a direct reference to the occult, one of 6 that can be found in Peterson's 3 books. If you are wondering about the identity of Hermes Trismegistus, he's the mythical founder of an esoteric philosophy known as Hermeticism, which is conveyed through a series of texts called the Hermetica. Hermeticism had an enormous influence on Aleister Crowley, which he learned while a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. In Crowley's book, The Blue Equinox, he recommends reading The Divine Pymander by Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus, Occulta Philosophia, is not a book, but an image that comes from a compendium of books called 3 Books of Occult Philosophy. Here's the image. Try your hand at the Latin. Start at 7 o'clock, as it were, at the word visita, and read clockwise. I'll give you a few seconds. Now, here's Peterson in Maps of Meaning, quoting Mircea Eliade. The term vitriol underscores the implacable necessity of the descensus ad inferos. Visita interiora terrae rectificando invenes occultum lapidum. Visit the interior of the earth, and by purification you will find the secret stone. And Aleister Crowley writes, Visita interiora terrae rectificando invenes occultum lapidum. Visit the interior parts of the earth. By rectification, thou shalt find the hidden stone. The initials make the word vitriol. By selecting a quote from Eliade that practically mirrors text from Crowley, Peterson is likely honoring two crypto-fascists and occultists. Allow me to explain. Mircea Eliade, 1907 to 1986, was a historian of religion at the University of Chicago. He penned tomes on mythology, witchcraft, occultism, and shamanism. Before Eliade moved to America from Romania, he was involved with a fascist and Judeo-phobic organization called the Iron Guard. He made feverish pro-Nazi and anti-Semitic remarks and was thrilled about Germany's invasion of Poland. From an analysis of Eliade's writing, I think he may have been a crypto-fascist. In Beyond Order, Peterson describes Eliade as a scholar of myth and cites his book Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. In Maps of Meaning, Peterson's first book about the Holocaust, he writes about the shaman 30 times, linking the shaman to the topics of LSD and schizophrenia. Feel free to ask yourself, why? In an interview in 2018, Jordan Peterson indicated to podcaster Russell Brand that he was familiar with the occult and cited Mircea Eliade and Carl Jung as major influences. As it happens, Eliade and Jung once met, as you can see from this photo. As we've learned, both men were impressed by Hitler and made anti-Semitic remarks. Oh, by the way, in Peterson's Eliade quote, did you spot the reference to Satan? No? Well, let's get you up to speed in the bizarro world of the occult. Here's the passage again. The term vitriol underscores the implacable necessity of the descensus ad inferos. Visita interiora terrae rectificando invenis occultum lapidum. Visit the interior of the earth, and by purification you will find the secret stone. Descensus ad inferos means descent into hell, and is an allusion to the biblical harrowing of hell. According to the New Testament, when Christ was crucified, he descended into hell before being resurrected and becoming immortal, almost as if he had found the secret stone, or philosopher's stone, the alchemist's elixir for immortality. In the occult, Christian symbols are typically distorted or inverted. For instance, when Aleister Crowley talked about the Lord, he sometimes meant Lucifer. Crowley was filled with the Spirit of the Lord, or what he called the Holy Spirit, which he believed poured through him. Put another way, he thought he was possessed by and could communicate with the devil. Such beliefs were likely the product of the type of psychosis that comes bundled with schizophrenia. One of Crowley's mantras was, as above, so below, short for, that which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. It's a saying that comes from Hermeticism. Here's the Rider-Waite tarot card that occultists believe represents as above, so below. As you can see, it's called the Magician. You'll recall that Peterson reproduced a Rider-Waite tarot card for Rule 1 of Beyond Order. Crowley says that a man can become divine by the descent of the Holy Spirit into his heart. Again, the Holy Spirit is Satan, and by becoming divine, Crowley means becoming satanic. It's a reversal of Christian beliefs. As above, so below. Jordan Peterson also adheres to this maxim. For instance, when he cites the phrase descensus ad inferos, he's not talking about Jesus Christ. He's talking about the Antichrist, who visited the interior of the earth, that is, hell, and was purified, meaning by fire. Peterson sometimes tells his cult followers that they need to burn away 95% of who they are, so all that's left is a little husk. They can then use that husk to remake themselves and become self-reliant. They can become individuals, avoid the collectivist radical left, steer clear of higher education, understand that inequality and exploitation are normal, and they can focus on helping themselves, their family, and their community. They can exude strength, shoulder the burden of life, learn to make sacrifices, and be courageous and heroic. The same instructions Adolf Hitler gave to prospective disciples in Mein Kampf. Anyhow, as you will see, Peterson has spoken about the use of fire in purification rituals, which he said he learned about from the occult. Circling back to descensus ad inferos, Peterson has been alluding to Satan's return for years. In 12 Rules for Life, he quotes the William Butler Yeats poem, The Second Coming, which is a cultic verse about a new epoch to be governed by Lucifer. Recall that Yeats and Crowley were associates in the Golden Dawn, and that Crowley described Yeats as a lank and disheveled demonologist. Yeats's Golden Dawn name was Demon est Deus inversus, or the demon is God reversed. So again we see an example of occultic inversion, or reversal, of the sacrosanct. Peterson cites much of Yeats's poem, including the following lines. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born? The rough beast is almost certainly an allusion to the devil, who is heading toward Israel, perchance to topple Judaism in its debilitating morality, which is similar to what Crowley wanted and prophesied Horus would achieve when he rang in the new eon. In addition, it corresponds with what the Nazis were doing when they channeled the Nietzschean Superman. And no, they didn't exactly corrupt the Nietzschean Superman. Nietzsche wrote, I suspect you would call my Superman a devil. In this image, we see Peterson posing for a photo in front of indigenous art. Note how the bird's eye is above his head. The bird, presumably an eagle, is a stand-in for Aleister Crowley's version of Horus. Later in this series, I will show how Peterson plagiarizes Crowley's text about Horus. The bird is also a stand-in for the German imperial eagle, or Reichsadler, which Peterson has spoken about and shown images of, for example in this TEDx talk. In the same talk, he showed this picture of a statuette of Horus paired with an image of the all-seeing eye. Be aware that Adolf Hitler and his mentor, Dietrich Eckart, published a conversation in a propaganda pamphlet in which Hitler talks about how the Egyptians rendered adoration and reverence to the sun god, by which he presumably meant Horus. Peterson has quoted another Nazi propaganda pamphlet, and he plagiarizes the Eckart-Hitler pamphlet, as I document in my book. To return to the TEDx talk, Peterson also couples these images, one of a robed man with a conical hat and a dove, and the Eye of Providence, which appears on the American $1 bill. These two images are meant as tributes to Aleister Crowley. Here's a picture of Crowley with his conical hat about to release a dove. And doves often featured in his artwork, for instance in this painting, and in his tarot card of the Fool, which we discussed in part 2. Keeping in mind the Hermetic concept of as above, so below, in 12 Rules for Life, Peterson writes, No tree can grow to heaven, adds Jung, unless its roots reach down to hell. Jung's quote from Ion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, which Peterson has been quoting and mentioning for decades, is slightly different. More importantly, Peterson omits that it's embedded within a discussion of Lucifer. Jung says, the coming of the Antichrist is not just a prophetic prediction, it is an inexorable psychological law. He goes on to say that the manifestation of the devil is as if a pendulum had swung violently to one side and were now carrying out the complementary movement in the opposite direction. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And in the Red Book, Jung writes, he sees the tree of life, whose roots reach into hell, and whose top touches heaven. As I have said, the Red Book is deeply weird and occultic, and Jung said he wrote it in order to document his confrontation with the unconscious, but he may have written it after a break with reality. Jung said of the Red Book, to the superficial observer, it will appear like madness. In 1916, Jung wrote 7 Gnostic or esoteric texts called The 7 Sermons to the Dead. They were later incorporated into the Red Book. In Beyond Order, one of the books Peterson cites is The Gnostic Jung, including 7 Sermons to the Dead. Peterson also alludes to the return of Satan in Maps of Meaning, a book that mentions Satan 85 times, but only features the word Holocaust 4 times, even though, to restate, Peterson says it's mostly about the Holocaust. The return of Satan reference can be seen in this image, labeled Figure 67, the restitution of Christ, the mystic apple, to the tree of knowledge. Christ, the mystic apple, to the tree of knowledge? Okay, I'm no biblical scholar, but even I know that the tree of knowledge appears in the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, in Genesis, and that Jesus Christ was crucified by the Romans in the New Testament, and there's no connection between the tree of knowledge and the crucifixion, let alone to the mystic apple. But then Peterson could write about Christ and the magical banana, and journalists would call it religious mythology. His followers would think it profound, and his opponents would crack jokes about the mullet he wore in the 1990s. I imagine that in the 1930s, when Hitler was distorting the Bible to turn the Germans against the Jews, there were plenty of people who laughed at his mustache. To many, Hitler must have seemed buffoonish, if not an outright fool. But as Peterson tells us in Beyond Order, the fool is often the precursor to the Redeemer. No, not Christ the Redeemer. It's another occultic reversal. If only Jordan Peterson's online goon squad could burn their old selves away and integrate their Jungian shadow, they could become that Redeemer. We can theorize further that Peterson's Christ the mystic apple image is occultic by looking at the inscription on the cross. INRI. According to the Book of John, INRI was what Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, wrote on Jesus' cross in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. INRI stands for Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, or Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. However, Pontius Pilate's INRI has been altered by occultists, as Jordan Peterson has explained. The crucifix has Latin letters on the top of it, and it's INRI. It's the representation of Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. Hypothetically, that was put on his cross. There's an occult interpretation of that, which is also Latin, which I can't remember, but it means all nature is renewed by fire. And so the crucifixion then is assimilated to the idea of a forest fire. Everything burns down before there's new growth. Or as Crowley says, Jesus as the Redeemer. The method was explained in detail by a formula in which INRI, the inscription on the cross, became the Hebrew letters Yod, Nun, Resh, Yod, which are in the heavens Virgo, the Virgin Mother, Isis, Scorpio, Apophis the dragon, Osiris, the slain and risen. All nature is renewed by fire, and Aleister Crowley's new eon would be violently ushered in by Horus, god of force and fire. As Crowley also wrote, INRI, me crucified, me slain, interred, arisen, inspire, tarot, me glorified, anointed, fill with frenzied fire. In Crowley's fantasy, Judeo-Christian values would be put to the torch, and Lucifer's hour, to paraphrase Yeats, would come round at last. Nietzsche hinted at something similar, a post-Judeo-Christian Europe where people would live by their animal instincts and be free to practice cruelty. The curse of the modern age, he wrote in The Will to Power, is all the softening and moralizing. Man, he lamented, is no longer sufficiently evil. Declarations like this, along with all the raving about the utility of masculine strength, are likely what prompted Carl Jung to brand the prototypical German Superman a psychopath. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche also says, "My philosophy aims at a new order of rank, not an individualistic morality. The spirit of the herd should rule within the herd, but not beyond it. The leaders of the herd require a fundamentally different valuation for their actions, as do the independent ones, or beasts of prey." Unsurprisingly, the Nazis found Nietzsche most useful. One of Joseph Goebbels' 3 favorite books was Thus Spake Zarathustra, which Nietzsche hoped would replace the New Testament. Hitler borrowed shamelessly from The Will to Power, a copy of which he gave to Mussolini. In Beyond Order, which, again, is mostly about understanding the motivation for the Holocaust, The Will to Power is listed in the reference section twice. Peterson cites 2 translations. He's always figuratively asking the question, "Don't you see who I am?" When Peterson said, "The crucifixion of Jesus is assimilated to the idea of a forest fire, everything burns down before there's new growth, and all nature is renewed by fire," he was alluding to Hitler's Holocaust and Crowley's new eon, thereby blending crypto-fascism with occultism. He was linking the murder of Jesus the Jew by the Romans, who were held in high regard by the Nazis, to an occultic purification ritual involving fire. And who has he said excelled at using fire as a racial purifier? Consider the following, taken from a lecture at the University of Toronto. You want to burn everything that the person who disgusts you owns, and so you'll see people who are pushing the nationalist agenda hard, and Hitler did this beautifully. Everything that was outside of the Aryan domain of purity wasn't to be feared. It was disgusting, it was contemptuous, and it should be destroyed and purified by fire. And that was his message. The Nazis were unbelievably great at using fire of purification as a symbolic message. Think of the symbolic message the Nazis sent when they purified the Jews by fire in the crematoria at Auschwitz, the death camp in which Jordan Peterson is perennially saying he could have worked as a guard with quote-unquote happiness. Also, did you notice Peterson's reference to Hitler's Aryan domain of purity? The Petersonian equivalent is the dominance hierarchy, above which floats or soars Aleister Crowley's all-seeing eye. As Peterson has explained, the eye helps the person at the top of the dominance hierarchy to update the state. He told his students that that person is an artist. This is noteworthy because he has irately said, "You can't say Hitler was without artistic talent." Think I'm engaging in flimsy speculation? Not at all. He has said at least twice, once at Harvard and once at the University of Toronto, that the person at the top of the hierarchy is Hitler. Here's what he said at Toronto. It's like the elevation of the person at the top of the dominance hierarchy to the status of some kind of quasi-deity. It certainly happened in Hitler's case. Peterson encourages his cult followers to ascend the dominance hierarchy, toward Hitler, and toward Crowley's all-seeing eye. Something else. Note how Peterson didn't say everybody outside the Aryan domain of purity should be destroyed and purified by fire, but everything. This is the language of a malignant narcissist and psychopath. Such people view other people as things, objects to be exploited, groomed, harmed, or destroyed. Peterson views his cult followers as things. They are the herd that Nietzsche spoke of in The Will to Power. Peterson teaches his herd that what exists outside the dominance hierarchy are reprehensible neo-Marxists and appalling radical leftists. They are parasitical, genocidal, ideologically possessed, and they represent, and I quote, a threat. Such talk represents narcissistic gaslighting, which is to say, Peterson is describing himself. However, Peterson's followers could never figure that out on their own, because they're not supposed to do any thinking on their own. He does the thinking for them. Once again, when Peterson spoke about how Hitler burned things beautifully in fiery purification rituals, and Christ's crucifixion in association with fiery occultic purification rituals, he was drawing a line between Nazism and the occult. And from his plagiarism, we can deduce that he had in mind the occultic beliefs of Aleister Crowley, who tried to contact Adolf Hitler twice in the hopes that his religion, Thelema, might be made the official faith of the Third Reich. Incidentally, Thelema is Greek for will, as in will to power. That concludes Part 3. In Part 4, I'll show you how Peterson's description of materia prima, the image that precedes Rule 2 in Beyond Order, is stolen from Aleister Crowley. Thank you for listening and watching, and bye for now.